Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. I am always asked how I manage to read so much, so today I'm doing my ultimate guide to reading more and reading faster. I'm so excited to film this video because I feel like I get this question a lot when I say how much I read, and I also get it a lot in my personal life as well from friends and from family. They want tips on how I manage to read so much and how I manage to read so many books so quickly as well. So I'm putting all of my tips and tricks into one long video, and I have 10 hot tips for you today that I'm going to go through. Some of these you may have heard before, but I can guarantee that some of these you will not have heard and will not have tried in terms of reading more and upping your reading game. So I'm so excited to tell you all these hints and tips today. A little bit of background about my credentials, about why I feel like I can make this video on telling you how to read more. I usually read around 180 books a year. I think this year I'm roughly on track to probably read around 200. I've read around 40 books already, and I'm filming this on the 12th of March. I read a lot of books, I read them quite quickly, and I always have as well. It's gone exponentially more and more as the years go on, as reading becomes even more ingrained into my life. But I've always read a lot since I was a teen. I do think so much of that is thanks to so many of the things that I do in my life that allow me to read so many more books. But honestly, even if you read 5 books a year, you want to up that to 12 books in a year, I really think that these tips will help you so much in terms of getting to that goal. Or even if you just want to make reading a habit, or you want to read a little bit every single day, I do think you can incorporate some of these tips into your daily life to up your reading game. Because I'm not actually a particularly fast reader. I think I am reasonably fast. I'm probably slightly faster than average, but I don't, speed read things. I'm not reading a book in a day very regularly. My hour on hour reading is not that much faster than most other people in my life. It's just that I do read a lot, and I do have ways in which to fit reading in my day. That means that I can read almost 200 books in a year. So I'm going to tell you today how I do it with 10 tips. The first tip that we're going to be talking about is probably the most obvious one, and the one that you've already heard from other people, but reading is a habit, just like any other habit. Because reading is a habit, it is something that you have to build into your routine. It doesn't have to be a daily habit. It could be a weekly habit. You could set aside time on a Saturday or a Sunday to read, but the best way to read more is just to have it in your routine. One of the easiest ways to do this is incorporate it into a routine that you already have. So if you get into bed at 10 p.m. every night, and then you go on your phone for half an hour, you could say from 10:30 until you fall asleep every night, you are going to read, and no matter how many pages that is, you just read from 10:30 every night. Or you could wake up early in the morning and read as you get ready, or read as you eat your breakfast. You could read on your commute every day instead of scrolling on social media. It's just something that is so much easier once you've built already a habit. You can add this habit on top of that. And you know best how to build a habit, so incorporate it into your life in any way that you see fit. But my first tip is remember that it's a habit. Remember that it does take effort, it does take time, and it does take you carving out a space for it in your life. You can't just want to read more and then not actually make any steps to make time to read anymore. But my second tip, kind of on from that of building it into a habit, it is figure out how you like best to read. So part of that is figuring out, are you a morning reader? Are you a nighttime reader? Do you just fall asleep after you've read 5 pages? Do you like to read on your commute, or do you find it too distracting when there's too much going on? But also related to this tip is, do you like reading physical books? If you do like reading physical books, do you prefer paperbacks or hardbacks? Do you like reading on an e-reader, on a Kindle, on your phone or your iPad? Do you like audiobooks and listening to audiobooks? Because as soon as you figure out what type of reader you are and how you read best, it will be so much easier to read quicker and more. If you've never tried a Kindle or an e-reader before, I would really recommend that you try them, because I find that I read so much faster on a Kindle or an e-reader. Lots of people say that because there's a percentage bar right at the bottom that you're almost racing the book to get through, and just find yourself reading more and more because you know that you can read 5% more, and it's like a gamified way of reading. It's also very portable, so you can bring that with you wherever you are. You don't have to worry about lugging a big book everywhere you go. You can read a lot more books on a Kindle. Obviously the memory is huge, and there's also lots of cheap books that you can get and free books that you can have on your Kindle. There are so many benefits to reading on an e-reader or on a Kindle, and I find loads of people that when they get into reading and then they buy themselves a Kindle, they go from reading 12 books in a year to reading like 40 books in a year because of their Kindle. But also I think it's worth trying out audiobooks if you've never tried out audiobooks before, and figuring out a way to incorporate audiobooks into your reading routine. I love listening to audiobooks. They're not my primary way of reading because I find that I get more satisfaction from reading physical books. For me, my preferred mode of reading is a physical paperback, but I also use all of the different ways of reading, which is why I managed to read so much. With audiobooks though, there's so many benefits because you can multitask while you're reading a book. You can be cleaning your house, you can be going on a walk, you can be doing so many different things, cooking your dinner, like doing any kind of admin or boring like repetitive tasks. You can be reading while you're doing these tasks, and I find that that can up your reading game so significantly. And before anyone comments that listening to audiobooks doesn't count as reading, then just delete that comment, because we do believe here that audiobooks obviously count as reading. You're still consuming the story, and I do think it's ableist to say that people who are listening to audiobooks and not physically reading them with their eyes are not counting as reading books. Also with audiobooks, it's very easy to listen to something on double speed. So something that you might take 30 hours to read or even to listen to, a very long audiobook, you can listen to it on double speed and be done in 15 hours. And for me, oftentimes the narrators of the audiobooks are talking far too slowly for me to actually be able to process what they're saying. So I have to speed up books to at least double speed, and sometimes I go even faster. I'm not going to tell you how fast sometimes I listen to them, because people have been actually scared when I have revealed the speed at which I listen to audiobooks. But also with figuring out these first two tips, with figuring out how you like to read, when you like to read, this is so beneficial to helping you in finding your reading routine and finding a way to read more books. So for me, for example, for audiobooks, I know that I prefer listening to audiobooks when it's a classic book or a longer book in general, maybe a long fantasy series. I also usually do non-fiction on audio and also historical fiction as well. I love listening to those types of books on audiobook. Just for some reason, I think that I enjoy consuming the story so much better. If it's a slower read for me, that's why I love listening to it as an audiobook. Whereas if it's a more fast-paced read or something that I have to pay like very close attention to, I would rather read it physically or on an e-reader. Third tip is kind of an offshoot of the second and the first tip, but it is get the Kindle app on your phone or on your computer. Honestly, I think that having the Kindle app on my phone and my iPad and my computer so significantly increases the amount that I'm able to read. It's actually crazy, because every single time I'll have a couple of minutes and I can just sit flicking on my phone, I will open up Kindle and read a few pages of my book. If I'm waiting for a bus, if I'm waiting for the kettle to boil, if I'm waiting during an advert, I can open up and just read a couple of pages on my Kindle, or doing whatever I'm doing. I'm always having it accessible to me, and I think that that's so significantly, even just those couple of pages, but if you're doing that a few times every single day, you're going to get through a book so much faster because you're just consistently opening it and reading a bit. I do know that this tip is not going to work perfectly for everyone, because lots of people prefer having time to sit down and figure out what's going on with the book's happening, and I don't think that it works for everyone just to read a couple of pages like a few hours apart all the time. But for me, it really works, and it makes me read so much more. Tip number 4 is something that also you might call me crazy for doing, but I honestly think that this helps me read so much more, and it also helps me enjoy what I'm reading so much more as well. And the tip is always be reading 3 books at one time. Honestly, stay with me. If you're the type of person who just reads one book and then finishes it and then moves on to the next, just try doing it my way, and you can go back and you can say that I'm crazy after you've tried it. But honestly, I really think that this is such a hack to read more books. Basically, what I do is I have 3 books on rotation at any one time. I have 1 physical book, I have 1 audiobook, and I have 1 Kindle e-reader book. So firstly, by being able to split it up this way, you're always going to have access to one of the books you're reading. If you're out and about, you are commuting somewhere, you're on a walk, or you're at home, you're doing your washing, you can be listening to an audiobook. If you just have a few minutes here and there and you don't have access to your physical book, you can always bring your Kindle with you or read on your laptop, your iPad, or your phone, and everything syncs up. And then if you're at home, you've got a bit more time, you're reading before bed, you're reading on the weekend, you can read your physical book. And then also by reading 3 books at once, you are able to try out 3 different books, and you're not putting all of your eggs in one basket with one book, because you're most likely going to be at different stages of reading within each book. So for this book, for my physical book, I'm very close to the end, so I'm going to be able to easily sit down and finish reading this. The audiobook I just started, I'm only 1 or 2% into a 30-hour audiobook. It means that you don't get bogged down with one book if you're not enjoying it too much, and also you're more likely to be in the mood to read at least one of the 3 books that you're reading. So like I said, for me, I usually listen to longer, slower books on audiobook, but then read fast-paced, maybe romance or young adult books or anything I can get from my Kindle. And then physical books, I read basically anything else. So it's a real mix with the physical book. But by doing it that way and figuring out what genres work for me in different mediums, it means that not only do I always have access to a book, I'm also reading 3 different genres usually, or 3 different types of books at one time. So I'm still going to be always in the mood to pick up at least one of the 3 books. Also, it means that you don't get that thing that when you finish a book, even if you really loved it or even if you didn't like it very much, and then you have to go and search around for the next book that you're going to be reading, because most likely you're still reading 2 other books, and then you can just swap in another book into your 3-book rotation and carry on reading. Obviously, reading 3 books at a time doesn't mean that you're reading any of the individual books that you're reading any faster, but it does mean that because you're giving yourself access to 3 different books, I think that it's so much easier to pick one up and choose to read when you have the choice available to you, or at least it really works for me. So I would say at least try it. If you don't like it, if it's too confusing, if you don't like reading 3 books at once, that's fine. To me, it's the same as watching like a TV show and then a movie in the same night. Like, it doesn't get confusing, it doesn't get muddled, because as soon as you're into the story, you'll remember easily and be able to pick up wherever you've left off. So I would just say give it a try. I love my 3-book rotation, and I always try and keep it to at least 3, because sometimes I'm doing 4 or 5 or sometimes even 6, and that is when it gets too much and I get too stressed out. 3 books is the perfect amount of books to be reading at any one time. So my 5th tip is something that also may be slightly unusual, but I really stand by this, and I recommend this to anyone who's in a reading slump or keeps picking up books and putting them down and can't get to grips with any book even though they really want to be reading. And so my tip is, when you're first picking up a book for the first time, try and read 10% of that book within the first sitting. So the first time you pick up that book, read 10% all in one go. So for a 300-page book like this, that means you're reading just the first 30 pages, and that can be however many chapters you want to read. But I just really recommend aiming for this as a ballpark for a few different reasons. The first part of the book is so crucial in terms of whether you're going to be enjoying it, whether it's going to grip you, and whether you want to carry on reading it. And also, the first part of the book is the part that you're going to be reading the absolute slowest. You're always going to be reading it very slow, because you are getting situated in the story. You're trying to figure out the narrative voice, you're trying to figure out the setting, the time period, the characters. You're going to be physically reading it very slowly, and it means that if you do just pick up a book and read 3 pages and then try and pick that up again later and read 3 more pages, it's going to take you so long to figure out if you even like the book in the first place. If you're starting and stopping all the time, you're not going to be able to feel any kind of investment in picking up that book and finishing it, because you're not allowing yourself to feel carried away with the book. I'm recommending 10% because I feel that that is long enough for you to decide whether the book's for you or not, and it's also long enough for you to feel some kind of stake in the story. Something should be introduced, there should be some kind of intriguing character or concept or plot device that will mean it's easy for you to decide if you care about this book, if you want to actually read it, and if the writing style is for you. So tip number 6 is also related to this, and my tip is basically have a time once a week that you set aside to do a longer chunk of reading. Maybe for you that's on a Sunday afternoon, or it's a slow Monday morning where you can set aside at least an hour to dedicate to a book that you're reading. And that can be audio, physical, ebook, whatever. But like I was saying with the previous tip, I think that this is so important to feel invested in a book and also be able to finish it. If you're reading a book and you're stopping and starting and you're reading it over the course of 3 months, I find it so much more difficult to actually end up finishing the book, because you just don't care as much. It's not as much a part of your life as setting aside dedicated time every week to finish this book. And an hour is really not that long, especially if you do want to already prioritize reading in your life. Setting aside an hour on a Sunday afternoon is not going to significantly impact anything else you're doing. And it'll also mean that you will read the book so much quicker. Some people can read 100 pages within an hour. I mean, I can't. That's very fast. But in an hour, you could get a decent chunk of any book that you're reading, especially as you're getting getting to the end of the book. I think everyone reads a lot quicker as you get to the end of the book. That's my tip, and I really think it will help in also training you to read a little bit faster, but also just powering through a lot more books. So tip number 7 is actually a big tip. It's a 3-part tip, because in this tip I'm going to tell you how to physically read faster. All my other tips are more about how to read more books, no matter how fast you actually read them, just kind of incorporating them into your life to manage to finish more books. But tip number 7 is all about physically actually speeding up your reading. I would say don't worry too much about this. Everyone has very natural different reading speeds, and there's no shame in being a slow, methodical reader. And there's also no shame in speeding through books as well. But if you are a slower reader and you just really want to know how people can read so fast, this is maybe a few tips just could help you with that. So my first tip in terms of reading faster is actually to make sure that you're not actually saying the words in your head. This one might sound a bit weird, but stay with me. You don't need to sub-vocalize or vocalize every sentence and every word in every sentence in your head to be reading the book. And I've found with people who say that they are slow readers, this is often why, because they are actually saying every single sentence in their head. And this obviously really slows you down, and it's also completely not necessary for comprehension of reading the book. I think some people, especially if you're less used to reading and you're trying to become better at reading, can get really bogged down in like making sure that they are remembering every single sentence, and they almost are going back and checking, have I understood and have I read the previous sentence? But you really don't have to be able to recite what you've just read for it to be something that you've read. You've still understood it, you've comprehended it. You don't need to vocalize every sentence in your head. And then related to this, my next tip is learning how to scan and pick out keywords in sentences. I've now actually gotten to a point where I can scan whole paragraphs and basically understand what they're saying, because my brain will easily pick out the keywords in the sentence to know what it's saying. And I find sometimes myself, I get carried away and I find that I'm actually skipping reading the sentences and I'm scanning and skim reading because I'm reading so fast. If it's a really good book, if something's really tense and I'm like so excited to get to the next bit, I find that I'm scanning, picking up these keywords, and I'm ending up skimming reading the book. And I don't recommend this. I actually stop myself from doing it when I find myself doing it, and I make myself go back and actually read the paragraph, because you do pick up a lot more on sentence structure and what the author's trying to tell you. And so I don't actually recommend this, especially for reading fiction. But if you do really want to learn to read faster, and you find that you are kind of pondering over every word in every sentence, then this is a way to help you get the essence of what is being said and then move on, and being able to build up the picture of the story in your mind a lot quicker. And then my final kind of sub tip in this reading faster tip is basically sometimes it's really, really helpful to actually just guide your eyes. And I used to do this sometimes when I was reading non-fiction or for studying. It helps you read faster, but also it helps you from getting distracted if you are physically guiding your eyes along the page. So that can either be having a ruler to stop you kind of skipping ahead accidentally. Lots of people will be skipping, their eyes will just be skipping forward and back over the sentences, and it's hard to actually follow the sentence as it's supposed to be read. So you can cover up the sentences, just move this ruler down, or you can literally trace it along with your finger. And honestly, sometimes if I'm reading a very complicated book, if it's very like deeply conceptual and I don't understand what's being said and I'm finding myself rereading sentences over and over again, I will do this. I will read it aloud and I will read it following my finger to make sure that I'm trying to understand the actual sentence and the way it's written, rather than skipping ahead and trying to like skip the step of actually reading the sentence and trying to make my own assumptions of what it's saying before I've actually read it. So those are all my tips on actually reading faster, and I think they'll work for some people and they won't work for others. But also I would say don't worry so much about reading fast. It's more about building reading into a habit and making it work for you in your life. So my tip number 8 might sound counterintuitive, but it is to DNF more books. And if you're not familiar, DNF means did not finish, and it's basically a way of just quickly saying I did not finish this book and I'm going to put it down and not read it again. You can soft DNF books, meaning you might pick them up again later, or you can just DNF them and just not finish them. And I've been getting so much better at doing this because I used to be such a completionist and want to finish every single book that I've started. But I think when you're getting stressed out and you are not enjoying the books that you're reading, you should have a kind of visual cutoff point for yourself. Whether that's the first 20 pages, the first 50 pages, the first 10%, and then you can decide, am I going to carry on with reading this book or am I going to give it up? Because you have to remember that reading has to be fun. It's not about just finishing books. It's about having fun and enjoying yourself while you're reading. So if you have read 50 pages of a book and you're not enjoying it, you should put it down and pick up another book that you probably will enjoy. For reading to be able to compete with other fun things in your life, like scrolling on social media or playing a video game or watching a TV show, it has to be one of the most fun things that you're doing. So don't worry about not finishing books and DNFing books, even if you thought you were going to like it, even if it's your best friend's favourite book, even if it's a classic and everyone says that everyone should read it. You should just put these books down and not worry so much about finishing everything. Because trust me, you will finish so many more books if you're reading books that you actually enjoy. Tip number 9 is something that works so well for me personally, and it might work for you as well, and that is get involved in reading challenges. I'm someone that gets really motivated by a list. So even if I'm like watching movies, I love to work my way through like the IMDb top 100 movies. I like to have goals and challenges, and this also extends to my reading. There are so many different ways that you can do reading challenges. Obviously, you can do a year-long reading challenge where you challenge yourself to read a certain number of books in a year. You could also do month-long reading challenges where you're reading all of the short books that you own, or you're reading all of the classics that you own. And lots of people also do readathons that have different themes. There's so many different readathons that you can join in, and there's always one going on every single month, all different types of books, whether that's reading only sapphic books in the month, reading only classics in the month, reading all the long books that you have, reading books only from Black authors, reading books only from LGBTQ+I authors. There are so many, and there's so many that can fit your different tastes. Readathons can either be in a bingo board style where you can try and get a bingo by reading from the different prompts and crossing off a line or crossing off the whole board. There's so many on Storygraph as well. There's loads hosted on TikTok and Instagram and on YouTube as well. But you can also host your own. I'm obviously doing a reading around the world challenge where I'm trying to read a book from every single country in the world, and currently I'm also trying to read the entire long list for the Women's Prize for Fiction. I love doing reading challenges. I love having a list and I love working towards something, and I often find them so rewarding to be able to complete a challenge. But readathons in particular are so fun because you can do it with so many other people as well to hold you accountable. And this leads on to my 10th and final tip, which is find a reading community. If you're watching this video, you're already part of the BookTube community, but there's so many ways to find a reading community, and honestly, joining a bookish community will help you read so much more. By reading alongside other people, you can get excited about talking about your favorite books, your favorite authors, talking about new releases and prize lists and readathons. When you find a group of people who have similar tastes to you, you find someone who's making content around books that you have always wanted to read, it can be so encouraging and such a fun part of having reading as a hobby. I love my reading and bookish community on YouTube and on TikTok and on Instagram. I've found so many wonderful people through this community that have improved my life immensely, but also improved my reading. I find all of my favorite books through recommendations from people who know my taste and have similar tastes to me. And luckily there is just so many people who are online posting about books, including myself. So if you're not already subscribed, then please subscribe and join my bookish community. And so that's my 10th and final tip, is to find an online or in-person bookish community, start a book club, talk to your friends and family about books, because honestly nothing is more joyful than sharing your favorite read with someone you love and also reading their favorite books as well. So I hope you really enjoyed this video, and I hope you learned something or got something out of it, and I hope that you are inspired to read more. And if you did enjoy this video, please remember to like and subscribe and leave a comment with your favorite tip or the one that you think that I'm crazy for trying to recommend to people, and I will talk to you again soon. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!